Okay, as Keith mentioned, I'm a member of the Archaeological Survey of Alberta. It's part of the Historic Resources Management branch at Culture Community Services. We changed our name after the new premier came in. No more Spirit. We're all really disappointed about it. Just some background about the survey and the Historic Resources Management branch. It was established in 1973 with the passage of the Historical Resources Act. And there's sort of three functions that the survey performs. One is regulatory, one is a site data repository for all our archaeological sites in the province, which number over 30,000. And we also do archaeological research. And just a comment about those 30,000 sites. These are mostly pre-contact, pre-European contact archaeological remains that consist of lithic artifacts, stone tools, things like big giant arrowheads and knives, and bone tools, and large sites like head smashed in, buffalo jump, things like this. And the written record of history in Alberta is about 250 years old. We have an archaeological record that stretches back 12,000 years. So it's a very important record to preserve. Almost all of Alberta's history is in this record. And of course, it is often coming into conflict with development. So it's an important resource to manage because once it's gone, a site's gone, it's gone forever. And we never get it back, and we won't have that information. So, hence, we have a regulatory process to deal with it. And so just a quick summary of how the process works. Usually what will happen is a development will come into the office. We'll review it in a desktop manner, sort of high level, see if there's any known existing significant cultural resources in conflict with a development. If it looks like there's nothing really of heavy concern in there, this thing's mostly disturbed land already or land that's already been surveyed and dealt with, it will get an approval. If not, it will get a requirement for further work. And that is the Historic Resource Impact Assessment process, which involves a proponent hiring an archaeological consultant that will then go out, do an existing record search, find areas on the ground that might hold hitherto unrecorded archaeological and historic sites. They'll go out, they'll do a field survey, maybe they'll find sites, maybe they won't, and then they'll make recommendations as to how potential impacts to those sites can be mitigated or avoided entirely, which is always the best option to go for. So the uses of LiDAR in the office are again, kind of three-pronged here. We have terrain visualization, which we've seen a lot of today already, in support of formulating these requirements and also reviewing the results of impact assessment surveys. We also have dabbled a little bit with direct site detection of historic sites, things like foundations, fur trade fort palisades, cellar depressions, things like this. And some of the presentations I've seen this morning, Chris and David in particular, are showing me that the point cloud might be a nice way to try to find some of these features. But the main thing that we've been doing is trying to model areas of archaeological sensitivity with LiDAR. And just a note about our storage and access, it's right now on a network drive. It's kind of an ad hoc thing right now. There's only about 3 of us that really work with this stuff in the ministry. It's currently available to GIS savvy staff in our GIS, and people do know about it and they can ask us for maps about this, but this speaks to sort of the challenges of having such a large and useful data set. So the high resolution, particularly of bare earth DEMs, enables a visualization of the landscape at a scale that is really amenable to archaeological analysis. Most of the sites in the province occur on very small landforms. Hills not much bigger than this platform that I'm standing on right now. And as you can imagine, old topographic maps, the provincial DEM just couldn't resolve these landscapes. And what it meant is that we always had very broad brush models to plan with. And it was sort of the bane of archaeological predictive modeling for sure. And another advantage of the bare earth model is that the masking effect of vegetation is removed so that we can see the ancient landscape a little bit more clearly. I'm sure the geologists in the room can understand that it was like a light got flicked on and all of a sudden you're just seeing all of this detail that is it's exciting but daunting as well. So just an example, you guys have kind of seen this already today, the gain in resolution between the provincial DM and the LiDAR hillshade. But I just want to draw attention to one particular feature here. This is pure Great Lakes. Here's the lakes, here's a river coming in. And if I'm an archaeologist and I'm figuring out I need to go find a site here, I know I'm going to go to the lakes and I know I'm going to go to the river. But based on this kind of information, or say an NTS topo map, I would know that I would do exactly what I just said, go to the lake and go to the river. And probably go here and walk around this whole thing and find the good landforms in there. And that might take me a lot of time. I might get lost, I might fall in the lake. There's all kinds of things that can happen to me out there. What usually happens is that you go out, you walk this way around the lake, and just at 6:30 you find that thing right at the end. And have to like go back to the hotel and dream about it until the morning. And cost people more money on your survey. Keep that in mind. Okay, so by turning on the LiDAR, we can now see this landscape in much more detail. And with the eye of an archaeologist, you can kind of see areas that you would probably concentrate on a little bit more. These spits coming into this lake here, and this bump in particular next to this lake is quite fascinating. Something we just could not see in those old data sources. As we zoom in, we'll see there's actually some sites on these, already existing sites on these spits, and we'll see that this hill is you know, it's just as cool up close as it was up from far away. Another thing this map shows is that you can see this site here. This is a pre-contact site that was mapped on an NTS topo sheet probably 30 years ago. It's probably not in the lake. It's probably on that little bump right there. We can use this stuff to check the accuracy of our existing site data. Another thing it shows is these are pre-contact sites. This site up here, this is a fur trade post, or really more like a store that was around at the turn of the 20th century. You can see that pre-contact sites occur usually on raised landforms next to hydrological resources. But this cool site out here, you know, this is a totally different area, totally different people that created this site. It's not the same physiographic setting. So we can start to see differences in the historic record as well. Back to this hill, we can see now exactly how high it is above the lake. So we know that it's got a good viewpoint. We can see it's got a good access point to that lake. It's flat top. It connects up to another flat top thing. There's a little saddle down in here where sediment could be washing off both of these things, accumulating in layers, and if anybody left anything in there, they're getting preserved in those layers, which means we might be able to date the site, which is really important, especially in forested areas. It's very difficult to date these archaeological sites in the forest for a variety of reasons. So here, in terms of efficiency, we know that if we're going to formulate a requirement for a development that was going to go in this area, we would suggest that the archaeological consultant spend a little bit of time, more time in this area and on those spits than around the lower parts around the rest of the lake. So something we can say in the office, and instead of sending somebody out there to walk around the lake for 4 days, now maybe they can spend one day testing this heavily and doing a cursory look over the rest of the area just to ensure that our assumptions are correct. But nonetheless, that would really reduce the cost and the time, and also would probably find more sites than we would have if we had to walk around the lake for 2 weeks. So by visualizing just that kind of process I walked you through there, that's kind of what we do with LiDAR right now. We give this map to an archaeologist or a historian, and they just do what I just did, and then they write down their recommendations and requirements. What we can do is realign developments to avoid these areas that look like they have really a high probability of having a site, or we can guide that field work more surgically. It also helps us in reviewing impact assessment results. We get a multitude of reports in from archaeological consultants throughout the year, and one of our jobs is to determine whether or not they did a good enough job when they were out there. Having LiDAR to review, we can be a lot more confident in making the call, making the decision. Yeah, their field work was adequate. There's no concerns. We can add a lot of weight to our decisions by having the LiDAR data to look at. It also helps add weight to when we disagree with people and say, you got to go back. And they say, no, I don't. And then we show them LiDAR and say, yes, you do. So, you know, that helps. That rarely happens. Everybody's pretty good. Another application that we're looking at, and now I really want to look at more, but again, because of some of the talks this morning, is looking at direct site detection of historic sites. These are things like palisade walls, foundations, cellar depressions, most of them historic period. This would be things like fur trade forts, old homesteads, old trading posts, police posts, all these kinds of things, old town sites, abandoned town sites. We've done a little bit of this work, but only with bare earth models. And an example is up here on the Peace River. There's a really significant fur trade fort located along the Peace River here that's been dug on and off for 20 or so years. It's given us an unprecedented insight into fur trade, the early fur trade era in Alberta. But there's a lot of features of this site that are in the documents related to this site but have never been found on the ground. And if any of you have ever been along the Peace River in northern Alberta, you know it's a brambly mess. It's a tough go in this part of the world to find anything. So finding a small little feature of a really significant fur trade fort site is pretty challenging in this environment. So we pulled the LiDAR and we looked, and our historic archaeologist noted these irregularities on the floodplain. Whether or not those are natural or anthropogenic, it's hard to say without actually going there. But they're interesting. Nobody's noted anything. Well, nobody's ever actually visited this part of the site. So we're interested in going back and seeing if these things are actually related to the fur trade post. That'd be great. And now I want to look at the point cloud data to see if we can do some other stuff with that data to more take a more refined look at that. The most common use of DMs in general in archaeology is predictive modeling, and it's the most common thing that we do, or the most intense thing we do with LiDAR at the Archaeological Survey. As I mentioned, the coarse DEMs were sort of a bane to all archaeological modelers. It was the big excuse for having bad models, is that this stuff just doesn't resolve the landscape at a level that is useful for us to find sites. So we knew that when LiDAR came around, we'd probably be able to improve this situation. So we grabbed some and we undertook a pilot project to see how we could develop archaeological models using LiDAR. The preliminary results are encouraging, and I'll talk more about those tomorrow. I'll just kind of brush over them a little bit later. This is sort of a typical model. This is an existing one for Minnesota, the state of Minnesota, and you'll see here that you get very, intuitive patterns. Rivers and streams and lakes have bands of high potential around them. You also get large patches of high potential and vegetation types that have been associated with known sites in the past. This is a pretty broad brush, and on scale it's quite small geographically here, but these are pretty broad brush things, and you'll see all the time, and I'm sure a lot of the foresters in the room have seen these maps where there's just big bands all around all the creeks in these models. And like I say, given the data sets that we had, we just can't resolve anything closer than that, and it required extensive field work to verify. But what we're really looking for is quite discrete landforms. This is a really good example of the kind of landform we're looking for. It rises well above its surroundings. It's located next to a major hydrological resource, the Berlin River, and a nice little tributary creek coming in there. It's almost always going to be a site on a bump like that. And in LiDAR, you can do many things. You can do things with your eyes and your brain to isolate this thing. You can also do things with digital terrain analysis to isolate this thing. Old models would probably just taken this whole valley and its sides and painted it red with high potential. And you could have crews out there scouring the earth for archaeological remains. Here, with the LiDAR, we know that we can start to pick out little points that we think are more likely to have resources, okay? So this is just done by an archaeologist circling stuff on the map using the process I eloquently outlined at the beginning of the talk. This is all good, but to operationalize that on a large scale is going to be pretty tough. We have to have an army of archaeologists to do even just one FMA kind of thing. So we got to turn to the computer, and we have to see how we can start to mimic this expert knowledge in a computer environment. And I picked out some digital terrain analysis algorithms to kind of do this, to look for bumps and knobs and ridges. There's many ways this can be done. Wet areas mapping actually kind of does a similar thing, and we do use that data set in some of our runs here. So we've, as I said before, we started a pilot project. This is primarily in the foothills. We have 4 study areas in the foothills, one around the Lip Creek area, southwest of Rocky Mountain House, one on the Smoky River, one in the Athabasca River by Whiteford, one in the Wapiti River by Grand Prairie. We're seeing how LiDAR operates relative to the archaeological record. Is it different in these different areas? We're not quite done this project. We just sort of started undertaking it over the last couple of years, and we're gathering lots of field data and creating models, which I'll talk about tomorrow. But as sort of a spoiler, our initial work does show that this stuff creates more efficient survey design. You can go isolate your high potential areas more quickly. You can spend more time in your actual high potential area and find more sites in less time than you did with traditional methods. This is an output of one of the runs that we've done in the Lip Creek area here. And just as a real quick go over here, how this worked is I ran a thing called slope position index, which just classified the bare DEM into landform elements that basically conform to ridge, slope, foot slope, valley, these kinds of things. And I picked out the ridges, because that's where most, in the forest, that's where most of our archaeological sites are found, is on the ridges. That doesn't mean all of them are. There are other site types that are in different types of landform elements, and we'll explore that in further detail in later runs. But this is sort of the big catch-all, is the high dry places here. So I ran that, and then I compared it to just simple proximity to water courses. This is wet areas, stream channels that we're looking at. And I ran a Stroller stream order on that. It's the assumption being that a larger stream is going to be more attractive to human beings and game and things like this. These are the highways through the forest. So, and also ran it so that places where streams met got really hot, sort of normal stretches are a little less hot. So red means hot, green means moderate, yellow and orange mean pretty low. This intuitively makes sense. We went out, obviously we did a bunch of field work here, and we found, well, 14 sites in this map. 12 of them were in one of these landforms. We need to do a lot more testing. We need to test areas that we didn't capture. You know, all the typical accuracy assessment things you do with models, we haven't quite got there yet. But qualitatively, this is a good match. It matches our intuition, and it's matching our successful field results so far quite well. It is a little self-fulfilling, but we're comfortable with that. So leveraging LiDAR, I needed a buzzword to put into a talk. What we want to do is incorporate LiDAR into all of our review processes for everybody. Right now it's a little bit hard for some people to get at. So again, standard data storage and access. An internal web mapping application might be in play here. Again, the sensitivity models we'd like to use so that we can more effectively manage the resource. We can find more sites, protect more sites with less effort and less cost to industry. And we have engaged with some forestry companies and to some level other government ministries to help achieve this goal. However, it will take a lot of work, but I'm very confident that it can be done. And one of the keys to it getting done is that word of the day, collaboration is where it works, but collaborating with other people, other ministries, universities, and industry will be a big key in making this work. We can also use LiDAR to increase the accuracy of our existing site database, which will also improve our ability to plan. And there's untold research opportunities. We can use terrain analysis to ask why the sites are where they are. We can model areas of erosion to identify sites that are at risk. We can do more with this direct site detection on historic sites. There's really fascinating questions in Alberta archaeology, like the peopling of the Americas. How did people first enter North America? This is sort of one of the top crowning subjects in archaeology in the world. And Alberta is placed in a location where the two ice sheets that were keeping Asia and North America separate coalesced right in our glorious province. And then when they opened up, it meant people and animals could migrate between those two spots. And we're right in the sweet spot for that. And there's actually people right now going out pouring lakes looking for ancient DNA in lakes to see what the biota was like There's been a lot of work done in the 80s and 90s. It's heating up again. We have sites of quite old vintage that are related to that time period in the province, and I think LiDAR could really help us find more of those sites and potentially even older sites, which is, you know, just the crowning achievement for an archaeologist. My site's older than yours. So that's you know, the main thing here. Additional derived products that we find useful are just terrain derivatives that we use here. Yeah, the conclusions here are that LiDAR is a game changer in archaeology, really, and we want to get it into as many archaeologists' hands as possible within the government, and use it to help industry plan around our sites and our areas of concern more efficiently and cost effectively. Some challenges, it's a huge data set. We've all talked about it before, and it can be hard to work with, although some of these new developments of Esri and image extension seem to be able to, you know, make that not that bad. And we would like to facilitate research and as much as we can at universities and anybody else interested in archaeology. Thanks.